You're tuned in to the Dakota Housing Network on SuperTalk 1270 and SuperTalk1270.com. In-depth discussion and analysis of real estate issues nationwide and those issues unique to our area. Our team of experts includes Joe Sheehan, Greg Larson, Dave Floor, Brian Ritter, and a great variety of guests. The Dakota Housing Network begins now on SuperTalk 1270 and SuperTalk1270.com.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Ritter. I am the president and CEO of the Bismarck-Mandan Development Association. I am joined in studio today by my guest, Miss Renee Walker from Bismarck Public Schools. Renee, welcome.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Well, I'm glad you could join us on what is a blustery, almost winter-like day, right?
Oh, gosh. I think the temperature sank since I left home this morning, or maybe it was because my garage was just a little bit warmer than the outside temperature.
Jim, I don't know what you did on the way over here, but I popped my car in a neutral on the bridge, and I just kind of floated down. I just rolled all the way downhill from Bismarck. Yeah, I kind of flew into the studio. Well, we are joined today, like I said, by Renee Walker. Renee is with Bismarck Public Schools, and the reason we asked Renee to join us today is because of the tremendous growth and the tremendous amount of activity that BPS is experiencing right now. And we're going to spend a majority of the next hour talking about that, and we could probably spend the majority of the next afternoon talking about that.
You bet.
And so, but we're going to start off today's show, like every show, we're not going to start off with a little music yet. We're going to hold music till the first break, I think. But Renee, producer Jim and I, every time we do the show, we have generally a musical theme. And last month, I think we did Rick Springfield.
Yes, we did.
We did Rick Springfield. Before that, we did the Beach Boys. We're going back months now. But today, producer Jim has just slid me a note on a napkin that says we're doing Paul Simon today. Are you on board with Paul Simon, Renee? Are we okay with that?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Perfect.
As long as I don't have to answer any trivia questions.
No, we're going to do karaoke for the last segment. But if you want to do that, me, you, and Jim will be all set.
Happy to do that.
Walks down the street, he said, "Why am I soft in the middle of
See, he's starting already. We don't even need the screen. We do it with Jim.
You call me out."
There it is. So we are going to start off today's show with just some Bismarck-Mandan numbers. I mean, because like you and I were talking before the show started, there is still, just like at BPS, a tremendous amount of growth happening within Bismarck and Mandan. And the best way to do that, and the best way to quantify it, is just numbers, plain and simple. And so we're going to use the BMDA economy at a glance to look at some numbers about Bismarck and Mandan and the economy. When you ask employers, Renee, what is the number one issue affecting businesses right now, what do they generally tell you?
Hiring.
There it is. Workforce. Not even prompted. She came in right there with workforce, and she's right. The unemployment rate in Bismarck and Mandan is still at historical lows. And I will tell you the latest information we have has it going down even lower to about 2% flat. Now, you think back to your college econ classes. I know it's probably a bad memory. But
absolutely.
But full employment is really, 4 or 5% when you supposedly got everybody who's in the workforce, everybody who can work and wants to work is doing so at about 4%. Well, here we are at 2%. And the size of the workforce, the number of jobs in the economy, if we look at the number of jobs in Bismarck, Mandan, and Burley-Morton County, July of 2015, 75,800. August 2015, 76,500. If we take that back 1 year, August of 14, that number is 74,300. And so it shows you how fast the economy is growing. It's an incredible number. And now we're pushing we're pushing 2% unemployment. I mean, BPS has never really hurt for employees. I mean, but you guys are a big employer. I have to imagine that affects you in some form or fashion.
We are, and, we like to say in the old days we'd have a pool of teachers, for example, that might have 400. Now we have maybe half of that. So, yeah, it's impacting us in some specialized areas of education. So we're feeling it. But even in those more part-time positions, like people who help us as bus riders or drivers or food service folks, and, yeah, it's tough.
Well, and that's no joke because, you mentioned food service. When we look at where those open jobs are, and the best estimate we have right now is at the end of October, there were about 3,000 open jobs, a little over 3,000 open jobs in our area. If you put them, the two highest categories, you had healthcare was the highest category, which shouldn't surprise anybody. And then to your point, number two, service and service related. And so while a lot of people may not think of BPS as an employer, you're the school, you're kind of an institution. but you're also one of the community's largest employers. And so workforce issues impact you just as much as anybody else.
Absolutely. Did you want me to visit a little bit about that?
You know what? We've got that in the agenda.
On.
We're going to get that here.
Right.
And I segued us off track there, but we're talking about jobs, and we talk about the amount of money being spent in the economy. If you look right now at our sales tax collections, year-to-date 2015 versus year-to-date 2014, those numbers are up. And I think that's an important number to point out, because if we looked at the first half of last year, first half of 2014, when oil was still $100 above, still a bit, it's sort of the decline, and you look at the first 2 quarters of this year when oil was $40, $45, the difference is negligible.
Right.
There's very little difference. So what that should tell people is that oil and gas it's an accelerator. It's the quote unquote gravy what we have here, but it's not driving the community's growth, and sure it's not driving your enrollment growth either.
No, in fact, our demographer, what he's been telling us when he looks at the data, and that's what he all does. He's a data guy, and he says people are coming here for those medical jobs and those service industry jobs, because that's where we have the openings, and other parts of the country still haven't rebounded with their economy, so they're coming here for jobs, and then they bring their families and their kids.
So then we talk about okay, so when those people get here, they're working, they are spending their paychecks here in our market, but then where are they going to live? And we know that, we know housing is an issue across the board, whether it's single family, whether it's apartments, what have you. But when you look at September of 2015, you compare that to September of 2014, we sold more homes in Bismarck-Mandan this September than last September. I think that surprises most people. I think people kind of go, no, it's slowing down. We sold more homes in September 15 than we did in September 14. In fact, the average time on market, the average time that house spent out on the market went down, went from 80 days down to 70 days. And so, again, I think that kind of bucks the trend, or at least what I think you and I, Renee, are hearing out in the community, that things are slowing down. Those homes are moving faster, and there's more of them moving faster.
Right, and another number we like to use is last August or so, we had an additional 200 and some kids more. This August, we had 361 more at a time when all people are talking about is how, ag revenue and energy is going down. So what's happening in Bismarck?
Yeah.
We're a different cat.
A lot of great things. And the last thing we want to talk about here before we get to the break is those people when they're coming here and they're flying in and out. The Bismarck Airport, you saw an article earlier from the Associated Press this week about declining airline boardings, not in Bismarck-Mandan. The Bismarck Airport right now, year-to-date through September, we're at 189,300 passenger boardings. If you compare that to last year's number, year-to-date through September of 14, that was 173,000. And it's really due in large part to the efforts of a lot of folks in the business community in attracting new carriers. We've got Frontier flying seasonally again. Allegiant has added a new route to Orlando. We've got American Airlines flying to Dallas-Fort Worth and Chicago O'Hare. So now it's actually possible in the Bismarck Airport, Bismarck Market, to price shop. That's a huge development. As promised, we're going to head out to our first break with producer Jim's pick of Paul Simon. Be back here at Super Talk 1270.
A man walks down the street, he says, why am I soft in the middle now? Why am I soft in the middle? The rest of my life is so hard. I need a photo opportunity. I want a shot at redemption.
Right now, 27.
Wherever you are, Super Talk 1270 is there at supertalk1270.com. The Radio Pub app, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Super Talk 1270.
And we're back here on Super Talk 1270. This is the Dakota Housing Network. I am your host, Brian Ritter. I am joined today by our guest, Renee Walker from Bismarck Public Schools. And Renee and I are listening to the smooth sounds of Paul Simon's Graceland. It's dealer's choice in the studio today. It's dealer's choice. Producer Jim has got us going, Paul Simon. Renee's with us today to talk all things Bismarck Public Schools. And we probably could take more than an hour, obviously, in talking about just how much the district is changing. But when Renee and I were talking about the show's outline today, what we wanted to cover, one of the things I asked us to talk about was really the who, the what, the why, the where of BPS, because schools, kind of like hospitals, you're institutions, and people look at you a certain way when you're an institution, right?
Right.
They make some assumptions. But BPS is also one of our community's largest employers. You've got how many facilities, how many employees that you oversee. And so I think it's important before we go any further just to talk more about, all things BPS and really what you do for the community. So first things first, Renee, how many employees do you have? You're a huge employer.
Well, officially in Bismarck Mandan stats, when you look at, BMDA website, chamber, that sort of thing, we're supposedly the fourth largest employer. And I think that's because they look at full-time equivalent employees. So say the state of North Dakota has 4,600. We have about 22.
Ooh.
Okay? So in between there is Sanford and St. A's, But if you take a look at bodies, the numbers of people that we employ, because we employ so much part-time help, we would be number 2. We would have, the state of North Dakota would be 4,600. We'd be 3,200. People forget that we have summer school teachers who come from other communities because our teachers might not want to teach in the summer. We have substitute teachers. We have ticket takers. We have board members. We have people who coach, and that's all they do for us is serve a coaching role, or school resource officers. So nobody really thinks about the big part of the organization. We're a large organization. And as you mentioned, interestingly enough, that we have 28 buildings we also have to maintain. But, I wanted to talk a little bit more about staff.
Absolutely.
A year or so ago, we topped 1,000 teachers. We have never had over 1,000 teachers in our district, and that's because of the growth. Obviously, you have to have a teacher in front of those kids. And then another thing people might not realize, but 50% of our teachers have master's degrees. So we have a really educated staff, and we're proud of that. The other thing we're proud of some days, I'll quantify proud of some days, is that we're really lean administratively. When we have consultants come in, they can't believe how we operate out of Hughes, our administrative offices, with so few staff members. You think about our food service, where we are the biggest restaurant, we like to say, in Bismarck Mandan on any given day, because we are feeding, of our 12,500, we're feeding 10,000 of those, 85% every single day, whether it's lunch or breakfast. So that's a lot of people to feed. And you have to realize we have one food service director, one, with a secretary.
That's a big restaurant manager.
That's a big restaurant manager in those 20-some buildings. Obviously some of our buildings aren't schools, and we can talk about that. But the other thing is, as I mentioned, lean administratively, we have, if you put together 143 administrators, that would be the superintendent, the principals, and then professional support staff like myself. We have 143 people. We're managing 2,000 to 3,000 employees every day. But it's a lot of folks. We also have 969 full-time support staff. So not quite as many as our teachers, but you got to have custodians. You got to have cooks, bus drivers, all these other folks who keep the school running, secretaries, you name it. I think people forget we're such a big employer because they think of a school or a school they attended, or schools in a feeder where their children are attending, one elementary, one middle, and one senior high. But we're big business, and we operate leanly. Our centers that we have, I think people are familiar that we do have a preschool center. What we do is we provide in-kind space. That's federally funded program, but we provide the space, and that's over at Richholt, which was a former elementary school. And now, because of Lincoln and Liberty, we have 17 elementary schools. We have 3 middle schools. And with Legacy High opening this fall, we have 3 full service high schools, but we also have an alternative high school, and that's in the former Riverside Elementary building. And then I think people know about the Career and Tech Center at the BSC campus. We talk about that quite a lot. And then the administrative building at Hughes I mentioned, but we also have a facilities and transportation site. It's actually the former City Public Works building that's right across from the police department. So that's where all of our facilities, maintenance, management is run out of there, as well as transportation, all the busing for all the kids. So big operation.
When we talk about staffing, Renee, and you talk, you threw out some big numbers, and I will tell you, even though it's my job, and I like to think I have a handle on these things, the sheer number of bodies that you talk about, when you add up all those professionals, not only the teachers, but but the paraprofessionals, the support staff, the coaches, and all of a sudden you put it in terms that I can understand, where you're all of a sudden become possibly the second biggest employer in Bismarck Mandan. Do you see challenges with staffing? Because, again, we talked about the unemployment rate, just in the last segment. Are you finding it more difficult in a market right now to fill, certain positions, all positions? Is it something that you're working on?
Well, as much as we can, as you know, some of those part-time positions are difficult to fill. You've got someone who comes in as a playground supervisor for a couple hours a day. You have to have somebody who only wants to work a few hours a day and isn't going to get benefits. We've actually, our HR manager has actually tried to take some of those positions and structure them together. So you might have someone who wants a full-time job in a school. So you might be the crossing guard first thing in the morning. Then you come in, or maybe you help with breakfast first. Then you do the crossing guard. Then you come in and you take that hat off, and then you go into a classroom as an aide to help a teacher. Then you help with lunch. Then you help on the playground. Then you help maybe get the kids on the bus at the end of the day. We're trying to cobble some of those smaller pieces together to make one full-time position with benefits, because we have such turnover in those positions that are part-time.
But Renee, because you have such unique positions and such unique hours, do you find that there are some people who are attracted to those jobs because it is maybe just one thing in the morning, one thing in the afternoon, and people want to maybe save on daycare costs, so they're only looking to work maybe 9 to 3 or something like that? Do you find that can be just as much as an advantage as possibly a disadvantage?
Yes and no. I think more for maybe some of the positions that are, let's say, secretarial. Some of the aid positions where you do get out when the kids get out. But when you only have those couple hour positions, if you're a bus rider, you're only riding on the bus to help keep the peace, so to speak, for, an hour or two in the morning, an hour or two in the afternoon, so if you want something more to fill in or you need more, and, I'm sure everybody's tax situation is different, but sometimes when you work a few extra hours, then it impacts you negatively. So, we have to struggle with that. Also, as people have been hearing statewide with teacher shortages, we need to do a better job about telling young people about the teaching profession. How rewarding it is. The salaries are good in North Dakota. I mean, I know not compared to other places, but for cost of living, here. And we just need to do better at that. We need to get young people into the teaching field.
And the reason I ask about those unique positions and those unique hours is because, as you know as well as I do, Renee, when you're in a market like ours and competing for employees when there's maybe less than probably 1,500 unemployed people in our entire area, which is about 126,000 people at last count, well, you've got to do everything you can to really position yourself as an employer of choice. And I think BPS has taken a lot of steps to that end. But one thing that we're seeing from employers right now is really being much more flexible in terms of hours, location, things like that, because people are looking at how to save daycare costs. People are looking at how to, can I find something place that's closer to my home? Can I find some place maybe it's on my way to drop my kids off? That's the type of market you get yourself into when you've got 2% unemployment rate. You've got to position yourself differently as an employer of choice to really attract those employees. And I think just based upon the steps you've described here, BPS takes that very seriously. Right.
And speaking from personal experience, I think I've had a different secretary every year for the past 4 years. We know we need to take a look at that lower end salary for those starting secretaries, and we're going to be working on that to bump those up. But yeah, I mean, I try to be as flexible as I can. It's basically if you can get your work done and you can leave by 4 and adjust your hours, take a half hour lunch. You try to be as flexible as you can to attract good people.
Renee, just for the few minutes we have left in this segment, talk a little bit about the school board itself. I mean, because I think people know if they stumble across Channel 2 certain Monday nights, they see the school board on TV. Every November, you see this yard signs pop up. But let me talk a little bit about the school board, I mean, the size, the makeup, and kind of how things work right now.
Right. We have a 5-member school board, and the election actually for those is always in June every other year. So they serve staggered terms. So you'd have 2 people up 1 year, and then a couple of years later you'd have 3. Okay. And they meet twice a month, except for the month of December because of Christmas, and except for July and August. But it ends up that they end up meeting in August because it's the start of school, and it just keeps happening. But yeah, they're meeting this coming Monday night, I believe it is. What's 23rd? Yeah. They meet the 23rd. So they meet the 2nd and 4th Mondays of almost every month at 5:15 at the City County Building.
Now, Renee, probably should have asked this beforehand, but I'm going to ask you now in the air. When the school board has done something fairly unique in that you do have an open mic, so to speak. I mean, or in the fact that parents or concerned citizens can call administration, ask to be placed in the agenda to voice or air a concern. Is that correct?
That's correct. And even if they come, they didn't know they had to call, we still have an open public appearance section at every meeting so people can come. We we just listen to their input, their concerns, whatever it is they're bringing forth, and then the board doesn't respond until the next meeting because they need time to, look at data or get information together, and then they'll respond the following meeting.
How have you found that been utilized? I mean, I know it's just been a couple of years. I mean, I don't think it's been a real long-term thing, has it?
Yeah, actually, it's been since I think I've been there
Renee.
for 27 years. Sorry about that, Brian.
Oh,
but yeah,
boy.
Yeah,
But is it well received?
Yes, and Bismarck Public Schools, all of the superintendents I've had the pleasure of working with, all are transparent. And so that's part of that transparency is giving the public an opportunity to speak to the board directly.
And the reason I ask about it is because I believe there was one recent issue. I think it was about the same time that you saw a lot more about concussions in sports, and it was covered by the news media. But it was remarkable to me to watch a board to take a concern that maybe would have been raised otherwise, and you had a concerned citizen bring to the board, and the board, by all accounts, took it very seriously. Went back and researched the issue because they knew it was timely, and they gave that person the forum to do so, and they took it seriously, and that doesn't happen everywhere.
That's true, and our board is really good about doing that, and so I'm just glad to work for them.
Excellent. Well, producer Jim is playing us off right now for our second segment. We're going to leave you with Paul Simon, and we'll come back here in a few minutes on Super Talk 1270.
The mama pajama rolled out of bed and she ran to the police station.
Right now, 27.
Stay up to date. The Red Eye Radio. Overnight on Super Talk 1270.
All right, we're back here on the Dakota Housing Network on Super Talk 1270. Hazy Shade of Winter playing is back in. I asked for the Bengals version. We got Simon and Garfunkel. Jim drives a hard bargain, but it's dealer's choice around here. You take what you get. We're here today. I'm your host, Brian Ritter. I'm with the Bismarck Mandan Development Association. I've got with me today Renee Walker from Bismarck Public Schools, and we've been talking all things BPS right now. And over the break, we started talking a little bit about some of the services that BPS provides that maybe the average person on the street doesn't realize. When I think BPS, you think K-12. I start there in kindergarten, and I graduate when I'm a senior, and that's what BPS does. But Renee, that's not the case, is it?
No, and maybe while you were in that K-12 environment that most people think of, you also maybe had some talented and gifted programming. Maybe you needed some reading help. Maybe you had some other special needs or remedial programming, or maybe you were in sports or fine arts. And those are some of those other programs that make up our day. But what I want to talk about is what I kind of call the bookends on the other end of that. We have BSEP, as I mentioned. It stands for the Bismarck Early Childhood Education Program, and that's in the Rich Holt building. And people might think of that only as preschool, as Head Start. It's just Head Start. It is not. It's actually when we start with kids from birth. So there are 4 main programs there. The first one is Right Track. It's funded by the state of North Dakota, and it's a free program. They go into the homes and do developmental screenings for children ages birth to 3, just to make sure your kid is on the right track. Get it?
It's a clever name,
yeah,
Renee.
Hey, I didn't come up with it. And so that's a program that we have there. Also, early intervention. If you have an infant or a toddler who's birthed to age 3 who qualifies for some kind of support or services because maybe they do have that developmental delay, they have a vision or hearing loss, they have some other special needs, special education needs, that program goes on in that building. We start from birth, actually. If you look at it that way, Like I said, some of these programs are state and federal funded. We provide the space. Then we have early childhood special education. So when those kids are done with the birth to 3, they go from the 3 to 5. And then last but not least, the program most people are familiar with, and that's Head Start. And that's for income-eligible families of children ages 3 to 5. We also have a newer, I'd say newer, it's been in the past few years, Community Friends, where other people who don't have to be income-eligible can get a spot there. And their children, let's say it's a child who's, more of your average family, average socioeconomics, and they come in and they're mingled in with the other Head Start kids, and maybe they have some special increased or better language skills. Kids learn language from talking to each other. They learn words from each other.
Yeah,
so it improves everybody's language. So that's just one thing. Then the other bookend at the other end that maybe people aren't familiar with is with our special needs students. If they want to, when they technically graduate from high school, we also offer the life education program, and that's where we train them to actually live on their own, perhaps, if they can, and do workforce job training. And you may have seen some of those kids in our community. In fact, I was just waited on one at Target the other day. Nice young man. And so that's from age 18 to 21, and if they want that service, we must provide that based on federal law. So that's life education.
Renee, that's so critical in our market right now, because really when you look at how we're going to solve this issue of workforce, it starts really utilizing our own home field advantage here, so to speak, with the students that we have. And we've got great relationships with BPS. You've got great staff who's willing to work with the business community. I don't think that happens everywhere. But when you talk about a program like you just did, taking kids 18 to 21, getting them that help they need, and then helping them into the workforce, again, 3,000 open jobs, folks. If we can just get one of those kids, that's progress. And that's a service BPS provides that maybe, again, we don't always think of.
No, and that program's just a delight, and it's actually won some awards. So, there are employers in town who definitely take advantage of using that type of worker in their workforce, and it's awesome. And then another program I wanted to talk about that people, I don't think they forget about it, but they forget how big it is our summer school program.
Because nobody wants to talk about summer school, Renee.
I know.
No one wants to talk about it.
My daughter went middle school through high school. But, we have that. We have summer programs for special needs kids. We have summer programs for regular ed kids. People who are new in our community, they always go, oh, do you want to broadcast? You have all those children in your summer school? Because they think it's just remedial. Yeah. In Bismarck, again, we're unique. For years and years and years, this has been going on. But we provide accelerated opportunities for kids who want to take classes in the summer, get them out of the way so that during the school year, they can take other things that they want to take. People don't realize probably that our graduates in Bismarck graduate with many more credits than are even required by the state of North Dakota. But kids, I know my daughter, for example, wanted to take some other classes. She wanted to take choir, and she wanted to take band, and she wanted to try some other neat classes. And there's no way she could fit those into her schedule unless she took something which she would call maybe boring, like biology, or something like that during the summer. And so that's a very unique thing that I hope more students and parents would take advantage of, because those kind of courses, they just help you. They obviously don't hurt you, and maybe it prepares them better for college, which helps maybe reduce your tuition bill there.
Not a bad thing for you parents listening. Now, Renee, we talked about, and I know this is next on your list, but you mentioned earlier when you have new people come to the community. And certainly Bismarck-Mandan has seen its share of new residents, and it's added a level of diversity to our school system and to our overall community that we haven't experienced in the past. But along with that diversity, comes some challenges, especially as it relates to language barriers. And I know BPS is really on the forefront of addressing this issue as well.
Right. We this year launched what we call English Language Learner, that's ELL, and we have a welcome center. Because of space, we haven't been able to provide that. But when Legacy moved out of Hughes, that freed up some space. And what we're doing now is, instead of taking a student who isn't English speaking as their primary language and putting them right into a neighborhood classroom with kids who are all pretty much English speaking, we are now having them come to the Welcome Center first, getting them skilled up with to a certain level, and then when they reach that level, then we will put them in their neighborhood school. And the cool thing too is their parents can come. So they're learning language together. Oftentimes when we register some of these students, the kid is translating for the parent at registration time just to get the information to be registered for school. And we took a look, and in our ELL program right now, we have students from 30 countries who speak 27 different languages. The most spoken language is Spanish, and that's followed by French, Arabic, Russian, Chinese. Okay, I did have to look at a couple of these spellings. Tagalog, Liberian English, Ukrainian, Albanian, Twi, Vietnamese, Japanese, Tamil, and Italian, and many more. And so what we do, as I mentioned, is we try to get them and their families, if the parents are able to come in. Sometimes they can't because they're working, but get them skilled up in their English so that they can function better when they get to the regular classroom. And again, kids do learn language from each other, but it's difficult for a classroom teacher if you have a student who really doesn't speak much English just dropped into your classroom. That makes things difficult. So now that we have a little more space, we're trying this Welcome Center concept.
That service is so vital to the future of our community, because as we continue to grow, it will grow differently, and it will not look the same as it did years ago. And we know, right now, I think the rough estimate, Renee, we've had probably, 150, 160 kids in ELL programs and BPS this year?
Right. I think currently we have 143.
Okay.
I think it is. But.
So you add on to that, those kids, their families, they're here, they're part of the fabric of our community. And it's a workforce issue because we need those language skills. We need those kids, we need those parents to have the language skills that will enable them to become a part of our workforce. And again, that gets back to how BPS is really helping our economy address some of our greatest challenges.
Right, and some of those students, like the older students and their parents too, have a good education, had good jobs back where they were. It's just the language is the barrier. So once we can skill them up with the language, yes, they can become more productive in school or in the workforce.
Now, just a little bit before the break here, Renee, let's talk about how we are growing and how fast and how quickly, and this will take us a little bit of time, but BPS, fun fact for everybody listening, Bismarck Public Schools is in fact the state's largest school district, correct?
Correct.
There it is. There it is. Take that, Fargo. That's what we always tell people. But I don't think most people realize just how big the district is and the fact that it is the state's biggest.
Right. They think Fargo seems bigger when I drive there, so they must have more schools. And, I guess I haven't counted the schools, but they don't have more students. We have more than they do. We're at about 12,500 right now.
So tell me a little bit about how that number has grown recently and where you see it going. Yeah,
I'd say the past 5 years, I remember when we were jumping up and down because we got to 10,000. And then all of a sudden, as everybody knows, the economy changed and boom, now we have 12,500 kids. And what really, what we were looking for this fall is this trend going to continue? Because, you see in the news that the oil is taking a turn down. You see the ag is turning down. And when we had 361 more kids in the year before, we only had 200 and some new kids. What's happening in Bismarck, I keep asking. And what our demographer has told us is they are still coming here, not for the oil jobs, not to the Bismarck area. Maybe that's more west. And he deals with school districts in the west and the east and in Bismarck. So he sees the differences across the state. But he says, Renee, in Bismarck, you're seeing people come for those medical and those service jobs, and they are here to stay.
Now, Renee, and you guys have done a tremendous job with that demographer, and I've been part of some of those meetings. You've engaged members of the community. But really what they're telling you is BPS is expected to grow 19-20% over the next 4 or 5 school years?
Yeah, over 14,000. I can't imagine. But when you take a look at this year having 361 more students, that's a school. That's
true. Put it in terms
an average size school, if you averaged our schools out in size.
A whole new school.
A whole new school that we didn't open. So where are we going to put the kids?
So now when it comes to the demographer, and they've done a great job, and they are, traditionally have been 99.5% accurate. So when they do projections, we tend to believe them.
Absolutely. They're so close, it's crazy. When we get the new numbers, like the new numbers we got this fall, and then we send it to him, and he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I was, a handful of children off."
14,
and then he laughs.
12,500, a handful off is pretty good.
Yeah,
we're going to come back here for the last segment with Renee. We're going to talk more about what's happening in BPS, but now we're going to leave you with the next break with a little Paul Simon. Be back here in a few minutes on Super Talk 1270.
First thing I remember, I was lying in my bed.
Right now, 30.
The Red River Farm Network. Ag News is here on Super Talk 1270.
And we're back for the final segment today on the Dakota Housing Network right here in Super Talk 1270. You hear the sweet sounds of Paul Simon behind me. Jim, what is this song? I can't even read your screen. Oh, there it is. We're getting a little nostalgic in here in the booth this morning. Well, my guest today is Renee Walker from Bismarck Public Schools. And we just got done talking about how BPS is expected to grow. And we're at 12,500 students now. In the next 5 school years, Renee, 14,000 probably?
14,300, roughly 242 is the actual number.
So let's talk a little bit about what are we going to do with those students? This community approved 3 new schools a couple years ago, and that's Legacy, Liberty, and Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, Renee, Liberty and Lincoln already had additions put on?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you wanted the good news first or the bad news, but since
Well,
you went there, let's go with the bad news
now,
first.
Now
Well,
I prompted you.
Well, what we've got right now when we look at our demographers' projections is Highland Acres, which is a small single-section school, is over capacity next school year, but so is Liberty, and Liberty just opened their addition this fall. So, did you catch that? They're going to already be over, and they opened the addition. And then we did, the school board did approve putting an addition on Lincoln this summer, and then that'll be over capacity as well. So that's kind of the bad news. In a few years from now, we're going to be keeping an eye on Solheim and Sunrise, but that's not coming up for a couple years yet, according to his projections. But the other problem that we're having is the middle schools are all currently over capacity. And we knew that was going to happen. And if voters recall, when we went for the bond issue, it was going to be over $100 million. And the public, when we did some surveying, just said, nope, that's a little bit too much for us to bite at one time. And so we took the middle school component out. And we knew we'd have to come back and ask for middle school space because you can't keep building elementaries and having all these elementary kids show up. They're going to eventually funnel into 3 public middle schools. So the issue right now is, do we build another middle school and break the feeder system that we've created, or do we add on to the ones we have? So that's part of what the committee will talk about, and at some point today we'll talk about that committee. And then the good news is, at least for a while, we have adequate high school space because we opened Legacy, so we're happy about that.
Well, from my side of the booth, Renee, any issue associated with growth is good news. I mean, the fact that we have such growth in our community that's prompting us to have these discussions about new schools and feeder systems, that's fantastic. And we love it, and we know it leads to challenges, but from a community's perspective, you can't help but be happy with the fact that we've got this many kids. Yeah,
and that's what a superintendent will tell you. I'd rather be in a community that's growing than have to close a school, because that is not fun.
No, that is
and that's happening across the country. So, but the other thing is, where are we growing? And, we can talk about that a little bit. When we look at the demographers, he's got some cool data, and he's got like heat maps. He calls it. I love the heat maps.
Right.
Where it shows you where the hot spots are. And, that's based on, numbers, and he meets with all sorts of people in the community. He meets with realtors and developers and city planners, and he does his homework. That's his job. And when you look at the heat map, of course, I think nobody would be surprised to learn that North Bismarck, north of the interstate, on both sides of 83, are hotspots. And in southeast Bismarck a little bit, and then in Lincoln for the next maybe 5 to 10 years or so. But the main growth that's going to continue to grow, because it's probably about the only area we can grow, is north. Because as most folks know who've lived around here, when you go south, you end up with the river curving around, so you can't develop too much more to the south. So what will we do? Will we build more elementary schools, up north? I don't know. That's part of what the committee charge is. So, and I'll just talk a little bit about that committee. Then you're on that committee. We've got some chamber folks. We've got a parent and a staff member from every single school.
It was a packed room when we had our first meeting.
It's 75 people. Trying to find room for a meeting is interesting.
Right.
But the school board has found this model successful. It's inclusive. We get people from every school at the table, and then we get what I call the experts, the people who are school administrators who, look at this kind of stuff every day, the city planners, folks like you who represent the business community. So we're all sitting down. We had our first meeting in November, and our second one's coming up in December. And what our charge is to review the space and educational needs in our school district, because not only do we have maybe need for new space, but we have some schools that are starting to age. At some point you have to deal with that too. So the school board asked to have a committee put together, and the timeline is that we will present a draft for some community input. That's going to be at the end of January, so be watching for that on our website and the news and everything, because people will have a chance to comment. Then that committee will go back and tweak whatever the plan is based on the comments, and then they'll present it again to the public. So there's several times for input, but the board told the consultant that everything's on the table. And when people say, well, what does that mean? Well, it could mean, could there be some small boundary changes? Would the boundary changes take effect maybe 3-4 years from now? What about remodeling schools, building schools, repurposing schools? So we have no idea what this group of 75 is going to come up with when they finally look at all the data, and that's what they're doing. This group has homework, as you know.
Yes.
And we're actually even touring some of our schools.
Next Tuesday, first one, right?
Actually, this past Tuesday, or Monday was the first one. Tuesday's the second. And then we have another one. What we've done is we've set up 3 bus tours for the committee, and they're doing a feeder for each. So they will see all 3 middle schools, because that's where we really know the crunch is right now today. They will see all 3 high schools, and then they will see an elementary in each of the feeders. You know, a new one, what does a new one look like? What does one of our older ones look like? What does one look like that we've added on piecemeal, on and on and on in little chunks? So they get quite a representation about what our schools look like in our district. So they'll have a lot of information at their fingertips, and they're going to have to make some recommendations to the board.
What I thought was critical, Renee, and you brought it up just in your comments a little bit earlier, is during that first meeting, it was very apparent to everybody in that room, whether you were a parent, a teacher, or someone like me who's from the business community, the system is open to any and all possibilities. The board sincerely wants to find the best possible solution, or the best possible way to address the situation. And that means you can't say this is off limits. You can't say this can't happen. And I think everyone in the room walked away feeling like they're serious. We know that any idea you throw out, it's fair game.
Yeah, when the consultant met with the board, I think there was only one idea that fell a little bit off the table, and that was sweeping major boundary changes implemented next year. Because we've just gone through that, and that's we shouldn't need to go through that. So that one was tossed. But the board was talking at their last school board meeting that they'd be open to smaller changes, and maybe if they were grandfathered in a few years down the road, so that people aren't hit with them next year or the next year after that. So that's all fodder for the committee to discuss.
Renee, one thing we've talked about the new schools, but Legacy right now, Legacy High School has got a lot of positive momentum, a lot of positive buzz, because it is such a unique school. It's such a unique property, if you want to just boil it down to that term. Tell us more about Legacy and what it really brings to the district.
Well, let me spin a little story. Our administrators this week, we don't have any space to hold our meetings because we're out of space. So we've been going out to businesses in the community and using their meeting rooms. And we were at the Bobcat Acceleration Center this week, and they talked to us about the fact that Legacy is the type of school that will prepare students for the jobs that they have at Bobcat. Bobcat at their Acceleration Center, everybody should go see it, very interesting. But it's all about collaboration, so people don't have a set office. They work in teams, they move from spot to spot. It's about creativity, and it's about critical thinking, because their main focus is to come up with the next best thing in their line faster than anybody else, because that's how they stay viable. So those are the types of skills that we're trying to implement district-wide, but of course it's a little easier at Legacy because we built it more like that, as well as the 2 elementary schools. We built in space for them to collaborate. I went into Legacy, I can't remember, for a meeting the other day, and in a small glassed-in area in the middle of the hallway, there were 2 girls, and they were using a whiteboard, and they were writing on it, and there was a video projected, and they were doing something for Spanish class. It was very cool. There was a journalism teacher who was sitting out in an open area, not in the classrooms, but there's a lot of open hallway space, and she had a group of maybe a dozen students, and they were all working, just sitting around on chairs and with their laptops, because the building is, all wired, and the students all have Chromebooks. So yeah, it's a different environment and a lot more collaboration space and a lot more critical thinking, creativity projects.
It's so encouraging to hear that, because it's another example of a partnership between the business community and education and BPS. Superintendent Uzelman actually came to Kelvin Holt and I from the chamber, and then myself from the BMDA, and asked us, would we arrange those meetings in the business community, because she wanted to make sure that her team and her leadership got out and heard these issues firsthand. And again, it takes an extra effort to get out and to do those things, and I don't think that happens everywhere else. So it's very encouraging to hear, and very nice to hear. And
it's been eye-opening for our leadership team, and to know when these businesses, they'll do a short 5-10 minute presentation before we have our meeting, but when they start talking about the kinds of skills that they need in the workforce today, it's different. It's a different ball game, and it's good for them because it's the road we're heading down. One of the things that we're working on this year is called success skills, and those are those soft skills that might be, getting to work on time, learning how to collaborate with more than just your clique of friends, but with all sorts of people, because that's what happens in the real world.
That's right. Well, folks, it is time to go today, but I want to thank our guest, Renee. Renee, thank you very much for being here and telling us all about the great things happening in BPS. You guys are doing a fantastic job, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'd love to come anytime. I love to talk about our school district. We're really proud of it.
Well, thank you very much to Jim as well, and we will see you next month here on Super Talk 1270.